And our Nigerians spent 2.49 trillion naira on debt servicing payments in the first 9 months of 2021. Well, this is according to the data by the Debt Management Office. Between January and March 2021, Nigeria spent 612.71 billion naira on domestic debt servicing, while it spent 410.83 billion naira on external debt servicing, giving a total of 1.02 trillion naira. From April to June 2020, the country spent 322.7 billion naira on domestic debt servicing and 122.83 billion naira on external debt servicing, showing a total of 445.5 billion naira from July to September 2020. Nigeria spent 808.49 billion naira on domestic debt servicing and 213.95 billion naira on external debt servicing, giving a total of 1.02 trillion naira. Staying with that, we'll start the conversation as the Debt Management Office has disclosed that Nigeria's public debt has risen to 38.5 trillion naira as of the end of the third quarter of 2021. Comprising of total external and domestic debt of the federal government, the 36 states and the Federal Capital Territory, according to the DMO, the increase of 2.5 trillion naira when compared to the corresponding figure of 35.465 trillion naira at the end of Q2 of 2021 was largely accounted for by the $4 billion Eurobond issued by the government in September 2021. The data also shows that the total debt stock rose by 2.540 trillion naira in 3 months from June 30 to September 30, 2021. The federal government has come under heavy criticisms for engaging in the borrowing spree under the present administration, while the National Assembly has also asked the executive to explore other sources to increase its revenue and cut down on borrowing. Well, joining me live to discuss this virtually, of course, and more issues, is a macroeconomist and also a fixed income analyst at Chapel Hill Denham, Mr. Michael Ogunremi. Good afternoon, Mr. Ogunremi. It's very good to see you.
Yeah, good afternoon to all. Thanks for having me today.
Yes, we are talking about 38.5 trillion naira here. First, how does this come to you? What do you think about this? It's already a burden, as it's called, debt burden on Nigeria.
Yes, to be honest, I think my own choice of words would be that it's an overhang, as it were. If I'm going to play around with semantics, it's an overhang, it's a debt overhang, currently that we're seeing in Nigeria. But when I think of Nigeria's debt burden, I think 4 key, messages comes to mind. The first would be that it's indicative that the government is pursuing an expansionary fiscal policy at the moment, and that is justifiable. Like I always say, there is nothing wrong with an economic borrowing. The question lies with, how well are they using, the funds, the borrowed. That's the first key message for me. The second key message is the fact that, expanding debt burden is a reflection of, leakages in our revenue, right? And the fact that, we have a revenue system that is very susceptible to factors that we cannot control, and that is oil. The third, key message, when you look at debts, another thing that comes to your mind is the fact that we haven't been able to fiscally discipline, ourselves in terms of budgeting. Every year we turn out huge budget size that leads to, extreme fiscal deficits that later, consequently brings about high level of debt. And the fourth key message, will be that when you look at Nigeria's debt, 2 key principles are lacking. Number one, a debt should be responsible and a debt should be productive. By responsible, you're saying that what is the space? Do you have a plan? Do you have a space in between your debts? And then there's also the second principle of productivity. If you're borrowing, what exactly are you using the debt for? So you look at those 4, when you consider those 4, key trends, it's a clear descriptor of, Nigeria's escalating debt level.
I would like to follow up that many still say that our borrowing is below the IMF benchmark and all of that, and say that we are not. Some even say we don't have a revenue challenge. Or there are a lot of issues there. But let me ask you, why do we really need to be bothered if we haven't gotten to that benchmark or that threshold that is being set by the IMF?
Yes, Tolu, look, a bit of antecedent. You notice that the government, I think a couple of months ago, raised the debt ceiling, to accommodate for fresh borrowings. And that is because, just like you mentioned, the debt level, is still below, some of the thresholds set by the IMF. But I would say that from a debt sustainability, point of view, we have a long way to go. The IMF has recommended that, as far as debt, so a debt will be sustainable if, at any point in time, your external debt as a fraction of your revenue, is 23%. And then your external debt as a fraction of your export is 21%. If you compute these statistics for Nigeria, you will see that we are far ahead. In terms of debt to GDP recommendation by the IMF, yes, quite right. We're still below that threshold. But from a debt sustainability perspective, we're far behind, and that is why we have a valid source of concern. And then you look at the level of our debts, debt service in proportion to revenue. It has blew up the roof, in time past, and there is no indication that you might see that simmering down anytime soon. So I think it is still a very valid concern to say that yes, even though our debt levels might be below what IMF is recommending in terms of debt to GDP, I think we still have a very serious issue on our hand from a debt sustainability perspective.
I want to touch briefly on the Eurobonds, which has actually pushed our debt higher. Are we really getting positives from that, from this arrangement? Looking at raising our external reserves, yes, stabilizing our currency because our reserves is better than what it used to be. But are we really getting what should be from raising all of these Eurobonds?
Eurobonds are very instrumental to reserve accretion. Undoubtedly, it's a fact that cannot be argued, especially when it comes to developing economies, that have very fragile level of reserves. Eurobonds have proven to be instrumental, and that's also the case for Nigeria. Raising 4 billion in 2021, supported, the growth in our reserve. That is the fact about it. You check the reserve balances over time, you see the 4 billion reflecting in it. But here is the issue I have with Eurobonds. Number one, Eurobonds are not instruments that you issue all the time. No, they are one-off, right? So you issue them, when you have, an extreme need to raise dollar. So raising Eurobond, does not provide a sustainable solution to the hemorrhage we're seeing in our external reserve. And then there's also the point that even if a government say they have the leeway to raise Eurobond indiscriminately, they will service this Eurobond, and then they will have to service it with dollars. So you put in perspective, a country that is barely struggling to raise its level of external reserve, and then they're issuing Eurobonds indiscriminately. What it simply means is that they will run into, number one, the dollarization problem, and then number two, inability to service, this dollar-denominated debt. So quite right, the Eurobond has supported the level of our reserves, as far as 2021 is concerned. But I can say for a fact that it is not a sustainable solution, to, the hemorrhage we're seeing in our reserve.
Now, let me now ask this question this way. Now, what directly could be the economic implication if we continue to borrow at this pace? What do you think could happen?
I think it is clear. You can do the analysis from an individual point of view. If someone continues to borrow all the time, and the level of their revenue is not growing, at the rate at which their debt is growing, they are going to run into a debt crisis. That is the truth about it. But in the context of a national economy, I think for me, there are four key events, that could spill out of excessive and indiscriminate, borrowing. I do not think we have indiscriminate borrowing in Nigeria. As a disclaimer, what I think we currently have is we have unproductive debts. That's where I have an issue. But in terms of economic implication, I think one of the biggest implications which we've seen, in countries that have borrowed indiscriminately is the fact that they have very high likelihood of defaulting in their debts. And as a fallout of that, when they default on their debt, what it means is it becomes expensive for them to raise, foreign bonds or Eurobonds, at some time in the future, because their credit rating will definitely get affected. The third impact of excessive borrowing is the possibility of asset seizure. You look at some African countries, currently they have to, acquire, their assets to, foreign lender because they are unable to meet up with the debts. And then one of the major economic implication of borrowing indiscriminately is the fact that you're literally mortgaging, your savings, your future savings, because the truth is, if you do not have a revenue level that is growing in tandem with the level of the borrowings, at some point in time you will fall back on your national savings to pay back the debts. And once you exhaust your national savings, what it simply means is that future generations will find it difficult to live based on the quality that is appropriate for them. So those are the four key implications as far as indiscriminate borrowing by countries is concerned.
So one will now follow up and say, we've talked very much about generating more revenue, internally generated revenue across the country, not even just the federal government, even for the subnationals, for the states and all of that. How well do you see government also taking steps to make that happen?
Well, in terms of, internally generated revenue and, what the government can do about it, it's important to answer that question. It's important to understand what the structure of the economy is, right? As far as Nigeria is concerned, yes, there might be several other sources of revenue, but I think taxes, crude oil exports, and non-crude oil exports are the three main, streams of revenue for the government, right? And I think that if the government is going to boost, the level of the internal revenue, one of the things, that they need to do is find a way to cut down the cost of importing. Like I said before, it is quite interesting and it's very ironical for an oil-producing economy to be importing oil to its own country. I find it's quite an interesting trend, right? It should not be the case. And so for Nigeria, it now becomes imperative for them to find a way to beat down that cost of importing oil so that the revenue that streams to the government can be much more, significant. The other thing I think they can do is to grow the tax base. It is not enough for you to introduce new taxes to the system when the tax base is not growing. You're simply going to make it more, you're going to impose more hardship, make life unbearable for consumers. The ideal thing would be to grow the tax base, which is basically, manufacturing and production activities. When you do that, then post the development you see in that space, you can then begin to introduce, fresh taxes. The other thing I think, the government can do is to look into, other non-revenue channels. There are some burden areas of the economy that government can latch onto. One of it is entertainment. Entertainment is a very big industry for, the economy currently, and that is one area that I feel that the government should begin to explore ways in which they can, get money from it. Agriculture is also, another one. Agriculture has proven to be very resilient as far as, this economy is concerned. It has withstood several shocks, and so it means that it's a very strong sector for the government to latch onto. So those are the ways I think we can grow our internal generated revenue.
So almost finally, when we talk about government trying to borrow, and that argument comes up that depends on what you're borrowing for, either for productive or unproductive use. Well, can you advise government, or can government be advised to borrow to fulfill social contracts with the citizens, like the likes of subsidies and all of that we see at the moment? What do you think about government borrowing to sustain social contracts with citizens?
So I'll put the question back to you to say, what other choice do they have? Honestly speaking, the government is sometimes, I like to say the government is boxed up, right? And again, I'll reiterate the fact that There is nothing wrong with borrowing. Absolutely nothing wrong with borrowing. Two things. Number one is to make sure that you're borrowing responsibly. And that is where borrowing threshold comes to play. You're paying attention to recommended debt to GDP level. You're paying attention to threshold for the debt sustainability framework by the IMF, just like I earlier mentioned. As long as you don't breach this level, I think you're fine. And then the other thing will be that your debt should be productive. If you're borrowing, what are you using the money to do? You should be using the money to earn returns. In fact, any borrowing, if you're borrowing and whatever amount you borrowed, you cannot generate a return on it to service at least the level of your debt, then that borrowing is definitely not productive. So there is nothing wrong with the government borrowing from multilateral organizations or from external financiers to fulfill their social contract to citizens. As a matter of fact, it's the social contracts, they have an obligation to fulfill their end of the bargain. And if it means going the borrowing route, then it's fine. All they need to do is ensure that the borrowing is, number one, responsible, and number two, productive.
What a good way to leave it. I must thank you so much. I've been speaking to fixed income analyst there at Chapel Hill Denham, Mr. Michael Ogunremi. Thank you so much spending your afternoon with us on Business Nigeria. We really do appreciate this.
Thank you very much, Dr.
Enjoy the rest of your day.